Welcome to Between Product and Partnerships, a podcast focused on bringing together product, partnership, and engineering leaders to discuss how to build, support, and scale SaaS ecosystems. Presented by the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance and sponsored by Pandium, an integration platform and marketplace for ecosystems.
Welcome. I'm Kelly Sarabin. I'm the Director of Marketing at Pandium, and I'm the co-founder of the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance. Today, we are going to be talking about user-centric approach to product integrations. And we have Priya from RingCentral with us. Priya, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your experience?
Of course, Kelly. So I am Priya, as Kelly introduced. I am the director here at RingCentral, mainly focusing on product integrations. And I have more than 10 plus years of experience in the SaaS world, as well as in the collaboration space. And I am very passionate about user experience and, and believe in user-centric design and design thinking, and look forward to this session.
Amazing. So, just to take a little bit of a step back before we dive too deep into it, product integrations for SaaS companies are very cross-functional, usually have a tech partnerships manager involved in the process. You might have CS involved in the process, but, from your perspective, what role do you think product and product managers should be playing in sort of deciding even which integrations that you should be building and owning? And really, so what should their role be in that process?
Yes, I mean, to me, I feel product managers pretty much lead and influence what needs to be built next, right? And always, start with purpose in mind. As product manager, having a purpose in mind helps us to attain which goal we want to achieve through this product. And most successful product teams give importance to clear objective and deep understanding of user needs while prioritizing what to build next. This way, big decisions are not taken by impulse or just out of intuition, right? And key attributes to look for while determining what next to be built is to kind of understand and deep dive into which segment will benefit from this product. What's the scale of impact, and does it solve user pain point and brings value to the customers we are offering this product to? And I have found a really good framework, which is called RISE framework. And RISE stands for reach, impact, confidence, and effort, which has been very useful in, while I'm prioritizing and helping out with what does it mean to the audience that I'm building for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe we can get into a little bit later on how, products should be working with those different stakeholders to kind of execute on that framework. But, one of the reasons I reached out to you is because I read an article that you wrote on user-centric approach to product integrations. Yes. And, I would love to hear, from your side, what exactly does that mean? Like we have, almost all SaaS companies now are building product integrations from small to very large. Almost every company owns some product integrations. So really, what does it mean from, some of the other approaches that companies are taking to really take that user-centric approach?
Yes, maybe let's first start with what's unique about product integrations, right? Product integration is unique in a sense that, especially for a product manager, because you need to be an expert, not just your product that you're building, but also the partner system or the external system that you're building on top, right? So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be more user-centric in terms of designing those product integration. And there's always this misconception that product integration just means data sync and data mapping. It's way beyond that, right? It's about how users can seamlessly get their workflow done. And user-centric approach simply means establishing user voice right from the beginning when you're ideating a product. This simply means listening deeply into the user needs and developing empathy to their pain to help define requirements and design. We need to account and support some of the users' existing beliefs, values, and habits that they might have kind of incorporated in the years of experience that the user might have using certain products and behaviors. um, I completely believe in three major principles as we think about user-centric approach. Number one is understanding user pain points and their needs, making sure we have early and active involvement of users early in the product definition and process, and iterating the design and implementation as we go by continuously validating what we understand is what their needs are, and continuously having the customer feedback loop going.
Yeah, I think people sometimes forget that a product integration, can essentially be its own app, its own system. It doesn't have to be that like one-way data flow. You're just sending contacts to a different system. It usually gets much more robust than that. Um, when you're talking, and I think you brought up one of the really core challenges of the product integrations is you do have this other system, which unlike if you're working on, say, a product feature, you own that whole process, right? You own that system, you have your current customer base. But when it comes to working with that other system and designing that experience, you really have to understand potentially another audience's pain points with another system. So do you have a sort of a approach in terms of, how do you get that data? Do you need to be collaborating with your partner's product team, your partner's partner teams, or should you be reaching out directly to the customers of the other products to understand their pain points with that system?
Yeah, there's quite a few things that we need to do, right? The first thing I would like to map my first principle that I just told, understanding the user needs. How do we do it is basically through user discovery activities, right? I think that's the beginning stage. Making sure, it actually comes handy when we want to empathize more on the user perspective, but also understanding how they use the two different systems. And what I have, in fact, incorporated in some of, our integrations as well as I'm building and leading the team is number one, make sure we have user interviews. Honestly, nothing beats like having a user interview and actually talking to those actual users. And we should, in fact, know, especially building enterprise product integrations, it's important to keep a note that buyer personas could be different from the actual user persona. And you need to account for both because buyers are generally more interested in cost, configuration, onboarding kind of a thing, versus an actual user who is more interested in ease of use. How do I get my stuff done kind of a thing. And what has benefited me, and going back to your question about where do you get all this data from, is, maybe shadowing users. Kind of experiencing a day in a life of a user and performing, how do they go about performing tasks, certain ways in which they perform, the workarounds that they do today, and what's the emotional state as they go about doing all this. And what has helped me a lot is to actually map the entire user journey right from starting with onboarding. How do they even onboard? How do they discover this product or integration? How do they actually engage? How do they plan to use this product? And how do they exit, right? Like, how do they finish their job and move on with their life? So that has been really important. And I feel like as product managers, that's something that we need to do and continue to do. And, making sure that you ask series of questions, understanding their current behavior and possible workarounds, sorry. And, it's definitely worth your time, right? Understanding the user persona, limitations, and sometimes during the sessions, we do get suggestions on what can be improved for a product to be even better than our competitors. So those are the few things that I would think about as product managers on some of the things that they can do, trying to understand from the user perspective, not just from the system perspective, right? Because of course, these are two different systems, but it comes back to that whole user-centric approach of how the users thinks about these two systems and how it needs to work seamlessly.
And when you're doing that process, are you, you know, traditionally or most often focusing on sort of your current customers? Because I think for some people, Just like with product features, but product integrations in particular, because it can be a partnership, they're looking at it as sort of a market expansion. So even before the product integration is built, you might be looking at it as, we're going to use this to attract new customers of this other system, which we see a use case that we think will be valuable. If that's more of the case, do you then really expand the scope of those conversations to include potentially even prospects of both systems?
Exactly. Yeah, you're spot on, Kelly. So again, it goes back to what I said, right? Understanding the purpose and understanding the goal. If the goal is pretty much, let's say, growth, and adding or expanding your user segment, then making sure you understand those persona, again, these user interviews come really handy. Because as a product manager, it's impossible to be an expert for all systems, right? I wish that was the ideal kind of a scenario, which is not. And how do you gain that domain knowledge? Because sometimes you got to work in vertical related domain, let's say a virtual classroom kind of, in an educational domain, or let's say you have to do something in telehealth, which is completely different kind of an integration. So how do you, as a product manager, gain those insights about the user behavior? Is to make sure you have these interviews, and also understanding the segment you're targeting, right? And what kind of systems they use, and during these interviews you get to know what other systems they use. An example I could say is, in fact, I was working on a telehealth kind of integration. I had zero clue on what it means, right? Like, what does a doctor do? What does a patient need? And what does a nurse a role play in all of these? And it was so insightful to actually shadow some of the nurse and the administrative officers in the clinic, to understand how they actually use healthcare system. They have these notes that they take in the side, and then they use Outlook. I mean, there are 3 to 4 different systems they use, and these are all workarounds that they're trying to do to address their needs. And that's where, as a product manager, you need to be creative to see how you can simplify their life. And again, I would go back to that whole user-centric approach in defining, if it's growth, right? If it's retention, it's kind of little different. How do you penetrate in the current account? How do you retain those customers? How do you keep themselves engaged in the product? How do they come back in the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? We need to have a plan in place. Engagement goal is a little different, right? It's just more of how engaged can you keep the user within the product. The more simple, the more effective the workflow gets, the more they're going to come and use it, right? So those are things that we need to consider as we're thinking about our roadmap, as well as building the products.
So I think this interesting thing, right, about having this other system and learning, to your point, sort of new users, new knowledge about their journey and their emotions. There may be some strategic integrations that have a product person who solely own that one integration, right? And then they stay with it for their whole job. But when you get even more to sort of, ones that are of mid-level importance, you might not have someone who's like, okay, this is going to be your full-time job indefinitely. And I think then at that point, the product manager sort of has to face this dilemma, right? Like, how much time should I invest in learning this other system? And also, we know there's going to be technical limitations, right? So you can understand the user's journey and what they want and what their pain points are, but you have the own limitations on your own system. But also, say the other system may not have webhooks. They might not have a bulk endpoint. And they may have, really restrictive rate limits. They'll be different in every case, but there's going to be restrictions. And so, do you have advice for product managers who, are investing in building out an integration, but maybe it's not going to be their full-time permanent job 100% dedicated to? At what point do they should they be very familiar with those technical limitations and, how deep should they go in like investing and learning those technical limitations and sort of incorporate that back to what the user might want, but to what's actually possible.
Absolutely. I think, as we determine as a product manager on the best user experience, and I think everyone's effort is towards that as a product manager, right? Is to kind of consider, in terms of technical limitation, I would say way early in the stage of building the product. And and also it's more about how deep you want to go, right? That's the next question, like how much time do I want to spend on it? I think we need to spend enough time that you get a foundational understanding what's what between the two systems, what the limitations are and gaps. And the gaps could be from UI design styles, right? There might be gaps just between them. They might be that the API and the mapping are so different that you need to figure out between these two systems. And third could be that, the two systems are the architecturally so different that it needs more engineering involvement in it to go even deeper, um, to vet out the details. But I feel as a product manager, at least a high level understanding of technical limitation is going to be immensely helpful even while designing the product, which is very early in the process, right? Because sometimes we come to a point where the development starts, we are all excited, and then boom, there is a surprise. Hey, this doesn't work. X doesn't work, Y doesn't work, and now we have to go back to the drawing table. Let's figure out, let's change the design. So there's a lot of chaos and confusion when we start thinking about technical limitation later on the stage. So that's one of the reasons why I always recommend PMs to start way early, understanding the design limitations, understanding the guidelines, and showcasing, in fact, the brand limitations as well, because sometimes the UI limitations of third-party platforms um, might not be very evident upfront, especially when you're attempting to integrate with, wall garden applications, really big names, which are more strategic, right? They have very strict branding and style guidelines. So I have found it super helpful to have, with these limitations, let's say sometimes we have to accept these limitations, find workarounds, and still move on, right? Like there's not a perfect kind of application out there. So we have to be creative and find those alternatives. And what has helped me is supplementing with some video tutorials, having a detailed user guides, FAQs, kind of addressing those limitations to ease out some of the user onboarding, as well as help improve adoption. So those are the few techniques that I've adopted to kind of mitigate some of these limitations as we move along towards the end of the building that product.
Yeah, and I think once you get to that stage of the process, do you have thoughts on sort of best practices around beta customers and sort of the time frame around that process, and really what you should budget out for that in terms of like timing and resources, and also if you are doing these beta customers, like how you should think about making sure they're representative, is sort of your frame for choosing them.
Absolutely. So what is very beneficial about these user interviews and so on, I'm coming back to that. The reason being is how important it is as product managers, during that process, you build relationship with customers. And that's really important for your success of the product, right? When you build relationship, what happens is that there's this partnership more than just customer, and just being a company. It's just more than that, where we build a more closer relationship. They are in fact invested on the product that we are planning to offer. And what I've found really helpful is to start with private betas, because given it's such a new kind of integrations, putting it out there for general usage might actually bite us behind. And I've experienced myself, right? The support call volumes goes up. We might not think about, the first thinking that comes for product managers is the usage doesn't take off, or the goal doesn't work out, right? But what we forget is the secondary impact or the ripple effect of support cases going up, the sales and account managers pinging you and trying to, kind of resolve these fires as we go. So I have always found it very useful to have more an organized way of rolling out these releases. And I normally start with private beta since we have built those relationships through user interviews. And other ways in which we have these contact with users. I start with private beta as soon as, given that we are all in an agile kind of a way, it's such an iterative approach to things. So during the private beta, we get a lot of input from users, probably this is working, this is not, and take this feedback, make improvements to the product, and go in for public beta next. And that's through signups and so on, right? Restricted public beta, and then we go full on in terms of GA. So that has kind of worked for me, in fact, for just going something brand new kind of integration that we think would create an impact, but taking it slow.
And when you're going through the public beta process, do you try to become more hands-off, so to speak, in terms of the user being able to sort of onboard and discover their own experience? So that's more scalable versus, I would assume in the private beta, it's a little bit more close touch.
Exactly. So private beta is more hand-holding, of staying very close. That also means product. As product managers, we are very invested in that product at that point. But as you said, as it goes to multiple hands of the users, it's kind of close impossible to handle every single user. So making sure that self-service onboarding is very important. So that's very key. But also what I have found very helpful is to make sure we have a feedback loop set up. That could be within the product itself, right? Like how would you rate this product? Is there any feedback? And making sure we as a product manager being able to look into those feedback and using the right kind of tools. Like there are some word analytics tools to kind of surface up what's the most common pain point that the customers are having. And in fact, we use Pendo as one of the tools as well to kind of get feedback. So those are some of the things that has been immensely helpful, as you said, when you scale, a way in which we can get more data. And to me, data is both qualitative and quantitative. And when I say feedback, I'm talking about more qualitative feedback.
So for people who have, their own in-app marketplaces for their product integrations, do you feel like, the reviews is a good way to have one touch point for collecting feedback on that experience?
Absolutely. So, especially when it comes to marketplace, it is very important to track those ratings and reviews. But to be honest, in my experience, most of the times, customers or users provide feedback in those marketplace only when they are really frustrated. So even though that's one perspective, and we do address it, take it to heart and address whatever the pain points are, it's also important to get the complete feedback loop, meaning that if there are ideas about improving the products, that those things might not be always captured in the marketplace feedback. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of supplement the marketplace ratings and review along with making sure there's in-app feedback as well, where you're reducing the friction for the user to provide any kind of feedback you're looking for.
And is there a good way for product teams to get specific feedback on integrations from the customer support team in a way that's sort of more systemic versus anecdotal?
Yes. So what I've found really helpful is to make sure there are monthly sync ups with the support team to kind of understand what is the volume of support tickets that we are looking at, and categorizing those support tickets as well to kind of understand where exactly to kind of start focusing on the key aspects of those support tickets, right? And what has been helpful as well is to collect that support ticket data and translate into what does it mean in terms of product investment, meaning which areas do we want to invest to elevate some of these. That also means customer pain point, but also it means cost for the company. So those are the things that we do look at as part of when we are defining roadmap. Is one of the sources of input is definitely support, and making sure that we have a constant sync ups with the support lead or the support team to kind of get their input as well.
Yeah, I think one of the other common challenges that I see in this space is, so you do all the work, you do everything right. So you have this really strong product integration that users are happy with, but nothing is static, right? And your product is changing, and your partner's product is changing as well, and their API might be changing, right? And I think there can be breaking changes, which are pretty easy to be up to date on. But I think the more subtle thing is, the API has a new functionality, or their product changes in a way where the integration should probably change from the user experience perspective. So, I would love to hear if you have any thoughts on, if this is not if this one integration isn't your all day, every day,
Yes.
are there processes or practices for making sure that someone in the organization is really on top of those changes and sort of staying in touch with it, so it doesn't have to be a case where they only realize it when enough users are complaining that this has ceased to be useful?
I'm smiling because I can very well relate to this problem. The way I've approached it, Kelly, is there are two things, right? What can a product manager do? But also, how do we partner with the engineering team to kind of stay up to date? Number one, let's talk about what can a product manager do. Product managers, in fact, it's a good practice to make sure you have partnership conversation, an ongoing partnership conversation with the app marketplace, whoever you're integrating with in a regular basis. It could be monthly if you're so invested in that particular app integration, or it could be quarterly basis, just to sync up to see where they are heading to and where your roadmap is heading to, and see if there are things that they would influence our roadmap, right? So I always think there are two things, right? One is more people who have influence over our product roadmap, and definitely these partner conversations that we do have influence over these roadmap, right? So making sure we understand those as we have conversations with them, but also working closely with engineering team to understand if there are any API changes that's coming in, and having newsletter signups, making sure you have, and of course, many of the developer platforms and developer portal now do have sign up for any updates that's happening, to ensure that you are up to speed on what's going on. And sometimes, you are sometimes caught off guarded. It's because, it's not that this is the only integration that we are working on, and most of the case that's not happening. There are other work that we do, and sometimes we are caught off guard. It's just more about how well you react to these changes, and how immediately as a team you can jump in and be flexible to take it on. And one of the things we've always done in my product team is to buffer out at least 5% or 10% of our product roadmap for these kind of updates, which most of the time it commonly happens that platforms do get updated, to ensure that we buffer certain engineering bandwidth, just to make sure that this is taken care of.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Do you think that is there any tension between sort of the user experience and that you're trying to achieve, and sort of the developer experience of the API? Because everybody sort of wants the end user to have a good experience, but for example, you guys probably have people building into you, and you have developer partners using your API. And when you think about the API, right, there's things as a product manager you want it to be able to do so you can meet the end user's needs, but then you also have to think, is this a good, easy experience for the developers who are actually working with the code? So I'm just curious, is that like a tension that comes up? Is that something that organizations have to like be cognizant of, we need to provide a good developer experience so people will build into us and build integrations, but we ultimately also need to make sure our API design is meeting the end user needs.
Absolutely. I honestly feel it kind of complements, which I think is an interesting perspective. But I feel it complements. The reason being is when in fact you're trying to address some of the use cases for the key users, that becomes like a great input to how you define those APIs for developers. Because for developers as well, they are trying to build for users. It's the same targeted users, so it's important to make sure we have certain developer guidelines as you think about it, and provide enough examples to those developers on how it can ease out some of the user pain points that's happening, right? So I feel in fact it complements, then conflicts, if you may say, in terms of I see that more as an input to the developer experience and to define some of these APIs as well. Because, for example, let's take latency or performance is important, right? For users, the way we define those APIs, the number of API calls or the way the APIs are structured, we make sure, like if it's a webhooks versus, it's, the number of APIs that you need to ping, all that architecturally is defined because of the input that we get from the users. So, and in fact, it will be immensely helpful for developers as they are taking these APIs and in fact integrating to provide that same seamless experience to their users. So I think it's all kind of a complementing each other and making sure that we are able to at last provide a more user-centric design, be it integration or be it API design itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can definitely see what you're saying. If things are designed well across the board, they can be in alignment for all the different users.
Exactly.
Any last advice for product managers out there and who really do want to implement sort of this user-centric approach, and any common sort of missteps or misunderstandings you see out there that you would like to offer advice on?
Yeah, one thing I want to just generally say, many a times organizations are just tasked to build ecosystems and marketplaces, right? And the earlier days, especially while building those marketplace, can be a tricky time. Even though success of building those ecosystem or building that app, in fact, is defined by the number of apps in that marketplace, it's important as an organizations to in fact stay on high value and strategic integration. So bottom line, what I'm recommending is to go deeper in building a best in class integration than going broader in terms of number of apps, which might be subpar in terms of the integration quality. And most organizations do not give importance to user research. I feel it's very, very important, especially user research, competitive analysis, and understanding the market segment, like which users are actually are targeting early in the product lifecycle, helps kind of making sure that we don't waste time, money, or resources in the later stages. And most of the time I feel that organizations run on assumptions, and that's a huge problem. So as a product manager, finding yourself making sure that when you run on these assumptions, most of the time product managers kind of get into a place where they're frustrated. Hey, why isn't my product not being adopted? Why is the competitors are going ahead of us? Because simply we need to lay the foundational work of making sure we think about user research, think about design thinking, and making sure we are able to build a quality product that addresses the user needs and their pain point.
Amazing. I think that's such great advice, and I do see that a lot out in the field because especially when it comes to integrations, you often have people saying, let's just grow, we need a marketplace, we need to grow quick. And then if you do that and don't put the upfront work, it gets super messy and you've involved all these other organizations, and it can get a lot of tech debt that's hard to get out of. So I love that advice to like put in the user work up front, focus on those strategic ones. And then once you have that down, start to scale it out successfully. So we will link to your article in the show notes, but is there anywhere else that people can reach you? Are you on LinkedIn, Twitter?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, pretty active. So you can reach me. I think you can just look me up as Priya Sukumar and you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to provide any kind of advice or guidance based on my experience. And as I introduce myself, I'm really passionate about user experience and design thinking. So happy to contribute to the community we all live in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all your expertise.
Of course, Kelly. Likewise, I really enjoyed this interview. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the content, subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. If you're someone who is working on building and scaling SaaS product partnerships, we invite you to apply to be a member of our community at saasecosystemalliance.com.